I am joined today by Ben Barty again. He's a writer for the Daily Bell. And today's topic of discussion is the collapse. We all know it's coming. We just don't know what exactly it is. There's always collapses, so it shouldn't really be that controversial to say that something's going to collapse, whether it's the dollar, perhaps. Monetary collapses have been very common. There's been various reserve currencies throughout history. We've seen empires collapse. We've seen entire societies collapse and disappear. So it's really just a matter of what it's going to look like and when it's going to happen. So we recently published an article. It was called "Collapse Won't Just Reset Society, It Will Destroy It." And it had a pretty bleak view.
Yeah, they basically go over the various ways that things can go south really fast. And the main takeaway that I got from it, and I encourage people to read the whole thing, is how thin the line is between civilization and collapse. Like I went to Chernobyl like a year ago, and that it really struck me, like when you go into the old residential buildings, the old communist gray block residential buildings, everything's still intact. Like it really hits you that these people were just living their normal lives one day, and overnight everything went south. And it's almost like it's just like frozen in time. You can almost, other than like the weeds that have grown up, like nothing, it looks just like it did in the 1980s. It's just really interesting that how fast it became unlivable.
Yeah, that's one of those things about, what do they call it? A regressive curve or something like that, where it's the decay curve, where things start to slowly go downhill, and then suddenly there's a drop off and things happen apparently suddenly. But when you actually look at it, it's been slowly deteriorating for some time. Which, it's interesting that you mentioned Chernobyl, because this article talked a lot about nuclear holocaust, basically. That was my main takeaway from the article, was that they think most likely scenario to seriously disrupt or collapse society is nuclear war, and that we're actually in a very fragile state right now where this could be triggered at any time. I guess with the whole nuclear holocaust thing, it's like, okay, 5 billion people could be wiped out, 2 billion people left, or something like that. None of the preparations I make in my life are for a nuclear winter. And I don't know that I'm going to prepare for a nuclear holocaust.
Wait, you mean like, is it really worth even living in a nuclear winterized world? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or if there's, so like the dollar collapses, I've made preparations for that. Maybe they're not perfect, but at least I think I could continue surviving if the dollar collapsed, and I'm willing to try. If all the bombs go off and we're battling radiation poisoning, and there's a cloud above us, and the summers, don't get above freezing, how do you prepare for that? And I guess I'm saying is, why bother even thinking about it? I have no control over the nukes. I don't have the nuke codes, and I can't prevent them from doing it. So this is one of those things where I look at and I go, it's not really something I can worry about.
Well, there's, like you said, there's nothing you can do about it, right?
But the real point to me is that there are things that you can worry about and things that you can't worry about. And this nuclear holocaust thing is like, sure, people in power should absolutely try to avoid that. And what am I supposed to do? Go to the ballot box and vote for somebody that's going to avoid a nuclear winter? Like, I don't see how we can control this at all. We also have to look at this. So that's the official story of how the world could unravel by accident, assuming everything we know about the world is pretty accurate. Do we think the people in power would let that happen on purpose? You've written some articles about how the supply chains collapsing and how they're not interested in money. They're interested in power, the people in charge, the corporate state, the elites, whatever you want to call it. And we can dive into that a little bit. Do you think that the collapse, whatever that means, and we'll continue discussing it, but do you think that this is going to be something that's triggered accidentally by international relations going sour? Or do you think that this is something that is a planned demolition, in which case probably wouldn't be a nuclear war, because if Charles Schwab probably still wants to live in a world without nuclear winter?
Right. Yeah, I think if the elites had their preference, they would definitely prefer controlled demolition, because first of all, they're control freaks, so they like controlling everything. Second of all, they don't have the capacity to survive nuclear winter, as far as I know. I mean, they do, the underground bunker industry is pretty huge. And actually, that might be a good topic of an article at some point. There's like a whole cottage industry of guys that design underground bunkers with all sorts of like climate control and, like they advertise protections against nuclear radiation. I don't know how effective it really is. But I don't know if even the elites who own those like underground bunkers really believe they could survive a nuclear winter,
or would want to. Like if their lifestyle they're used to, like they're not going to want to live underground. That could be a backup plan if their best laid plans don't unfold the way they think it's going to unfold. These people think they're really smart, but one miscalculation about Putin. We all know that he was a World Economic Forum young leader, but if those neurons aren't communicating with each other properly anymore, then I'm not sure that he's going to make the most rational decisions that are necessarily in line with.
And speaking of neurons not firing properly, we could look at the U.S. president also.
Well, right. And I don't know who is in charge of the nuclear codes.
Yeah, but it's not Biden for sure.
Right.
It's not Biden. But you're right. They're not as smart as they think they are. And they're reckless. And they're also selfish. Like if you look at Nancy Pelosi's little traipsing over to Taiwan to have a good time doing her personal business deals.
I don't want to spend the whole time talking about nuclear collapse because like I said, nothing you can really do about it anyway. That's not the type of thing that I prepare for. But I do definitely prepare for monetary collapses and supply chain collapses. So that's part of the project that I'm doing to, the parallel economy project to get supply chains closer to home. But we can talk about that a little bit later. You've lived in a few different places, and did you get like a different idea for the risks in each place? Like, did you feel like, well, obviously one of the places you lived was Ukraine. So a collapse scenario in that situation sort of did happen, right? With an all-out war is a collapse scenario.
Yeah, I wasn't there, fortunately, when it collapsed. But I was there not too long before. It had been building up for a while, this tension with Russia. I will say that living in third world countries, you don't have this false sense of security that you get when you live in the US. Like when you live in the US, I haven't lived in the US actually for like 5 years, so it might be different now. I know there's like the tent cities, and it's the possibility of collapse is more obvious now, probably just like going about your day. But when I left in late 2016, stuff was kind of chaotic, but there was this sense of like there's something there, like a backstop to stop chaos from like fully engulfing everything. But when you live in third world countries, like with no real safety net of any kind, like it's so much more obvious how unstable things really are.
Yeah, nobody in
That's-
Puerto Rico is going to wonder why you buy a generator or have a supply of backup food. Not that it's not a third world country, but it's supply chain. It's electricity grid is unstable. Everybody knows that, and in hurricane season especially, there have been cases. So after Hurricane Katrina, that was a collapse for a lot of people. It wasn't forever, but it was certainly 6 months without power, 6 months without internet, without a steady way to get food. So there's a reason to have a backup plan there. Moving on from nuclear apocalypse, there's this book that's actually kind of getting popular. Peter Zeihan, have you heard of this guy? The End of the World is Just the Beginning. His book, his premise is basically that the United States military has been holding together relatively peaceful world trade since World War II, and that's going to end. And with it, cheap world trade is going to end. And when that happens, it's going to affect a lot of places a lot differently. So, for instance, you have a lot of Asian countries where people have just been moving into cities. These cities can't actually support this type of population. They depend on a lot of imported food products. If the United States military does not defend those trade routes with its Navy, it suddenly becomes a lot more expensive to ship that food, and it's not worth it anymore. So you have city collapse in terms of the food supply chains. And you're going to have a lot of people that either have to move out to the country, or, I mean, honestly, he says that he believes there's going to be a lot of people that starve to death. And he breaks down in this book all the situation for different places in the world. And honestly, the US doesn't sound like a bad place to be. And Mexico also has a pretty young workforce, because that's another part of this is societies like Japan, where everybody's so old, with the amount of debt that they have. What do you do in a collapse scenario there, where the main portion of your society isn't even producing anymore? So these problems that he brings up in that book, to me, seem a little bit more realistic. They're also what you can prepare for. I mean, basically, it all comes back to like, have your food and energy supplies close by.
Yeah, I was about to say that's the main thing, is food and energy. It's already the Ukraine war has already starved. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's potentially in the millions of Africans, and will starve more because this harvest season coming up is going to be much less fruitful. And Africa, large parts of Africa depend like almost solely on imports of grain from Eastern Europe, primarily Ukraine. And there are a bunch of water mines and other logistical reasons that the grain can't get out. So, and yeah, like these, it's called economic interdependence and international relations. It's where like economies grow up to depend on foreign trade to meet their most basic needs. Whereas, just a short time ago, like, I don't know, 100 years, maybe even less, nations were mostly self-sufficient. They grew all the food that they needed. They sourced all the energy that they used from within. I mean, to the extent that there was like industrial energy, they sourced all that from within their own territory. And, globalization has done away with that. And it's created this situation where, events that happen outside of a country's borders that it has no control over can literally like lead to its downfall, to mass starvation, to the economy grinding to a halt.
Yeah. And of course, the reason this happened was because of efficiency. When you can specialize in trade, not just among individuals, but among nations, that can produce a lot more wealth, so it can raise the living standard of everybody. But there was a hidden cost. There was many hidden costs, but one of the hidden costs was the United States military budget, which was, South Korea and Japan don't have the best history between each other, but when they're both in the same US centric bloc, they are going to get along and indeed trade instead of fighting. And same with a lot of European countries. That cost the United States a lot of money, and basically it was a transfer of wealth to other countries, because it didn't really benefit the United States as much as it benefited a lot of other places. Because the United States actually has an immense heartland with some of the most fertile land on Earth and navigable waterways that have more miles of navigable waterways in this Mississippi network than the rest of the world. That wealth has been exported, and that's about to come to an end. You mentioned that a lot of countries used to be self-sufficient. It just made me think of the Netherlands, which right now is producing a ton of food, more than they need. And for some reason, you have the government trying to stop that and trying to, get rid of half the cattle in the country at a time when we're already facing food
it's
shortages.
crazy. It's genocidal. It's totally insane.
And this is why people are suspicious, because you can't just look at this stuff and be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's the priorities are so insane that people go, there must be something more sinister going on here, because no sane person would be like, yeah, now is the time to get rid of half the cattle. Now is the time to completely to shut down nuclear power plants. Now is the time to stop looking for other sources of oil. Because look, I love the environment. I personally think it's great to clean things up, but there is not enough clean energy right now to run the world the same way that it's been run. And so maybe the World Economic Forum thinks that people will just die or stop using that energy. But in reality, they'll probably go back to worse energy for the environment, like coal or burning wood, which is not only worse energy for the environment, but it's also less efficient in terms of the output it takes to draw that energy. Cutting down a tree and chopping it up and then cooking over a fire is not as efficient as burning certain fossil fuels. So I think that's also part of where this suspicion of whether this is like a controlled demolition or not comes from, is because why would they be doing these things? They know, you can look at the math. There's not enough clean energy, personally, that's made me invest in some unclean energy. The idea being that, and this isn't like some sinister way to make money. If there's not enough investment in the old forms of fossil fuels, and so nobody's exploring it, that is going to lead to death and destruction to a lot of people. And so by investing in these and continuing to explore sources of the energy that people need to keep this lifestyle up, you actually are helping people and have an opportunity to make some money if, they finally reverse this whole ESG, environmental social governance stuff, and instead go, okay, let's prevent people from dying and give them the things they need.
It's about social control, and it's about stripping power and independence from the average person. If the average person doesn't have access to energy, to cheap, affordable energy or food, that's going to consume all of their energy, just trying to meet their most basic needs. And it will also, at the same time, it'll suck all their energy out, and at the same time, it'll take away their independence. It'll make them totally dependent on the remaining in the good graces of the powers that be. And in that situation, in comes the Chinese style social credit score. I don't know if you or if anyone's watching has seen that Black Mirror episode, where you have to be a good boy or good girl, or your score gets totally throttled, and then no one will even talk to you. That's it's all about social control. And it's like you said, it's so obvious that you'd have to be the most basic like NPC robot not to see it. Amazingly, though, there are still hordes of people that apparently are unable or unwilling to see it. For some reason, they make this connection. They would feel like if they acknowledged the global technocratic state's agenda headed by the World Economic Forum, that somehow that would be like Trumpian, or like, you know, that would make them like a QAnon conspiracy theory or something, conspiracy theorist. How that connection works, like the mechanics of how you go from A to B is sort of mysterious, but I think that's a lot of the reason people don't want to acknowledge like reality.
There's the partisans that think it's all just because of like the other party and that there aren't larger things at play. But and then there's also,
well, if I can just add, like, it was the same thing during COVID. Like anything that happened somehow was the fault of the unvaccinated. Like the economy sucks because of all the lockdowns. Oh, that's the unvaccinated people that did that, not the government that mandated closure of all of these businesses. It's amazing the logical leaps that people can make just to satisfy their own ideological perspective.
Yeah, that's part of it. Another part of it is people don't want to look at things that are going wrong. I think that's the most basic explanation for most of society, I think, is just like, you know, bury your head because it's depressing, or you feel like you have no control, or you just don't want to think about it. And then there's the people, you know, that we're talking about that will come up with any sort of mental gymnastics. And you also have to remember that there's not a lot of people like us, and probably a lot of the people watching, that really think about this stuff. I mean, we kind of spend our time, or I assume, I'll speak for myself, like I spend my time thinking about these things, and it's part of what I earn money on, and it's also fun for me. So like 10 years ago, I would think about surviving like a zombie apocalypse because I really thought that's the way that the world was going to unfold. Maybe not with the zombies, but like, you know, post-apocalyptic scenario. These days, I'm honestly more optimistic somehow. And I'm not really sure why, except for the fact that I see so much potential, and I see so many people that are awake, because it's not really about percentages. You know, even if it's 90% of the people that are complete idiots, that's what, 800 million people on Earth who kind of have an idea of what's going on. There's a whole society. There's many whole societies that can be created out of the good guys. They're out of the people that just have an ounce of thought, or just want to produce, or just want to like live a life on a little piece of land and grow some food and not be dominated by the government, by the corporations, by these global, you know, the cabal or whatever. And I feel like there's an opportunity to have our own great reset. I'm not going to start using their words for it, but basically, like, what if a collapse wasn't into this techno hell, Black Mirror, where they have all this control? Because remember, they've always failed before. Like the Third Reich failed, the communists, the Soviet Union failed. The bad guys do appear to fail. With technology, you can actually grow, you know, you can have self-sufficiency on a quarter acre right now. That wasn't really the case for a lot of humanity. I'm on Starlink internet right now because it was unreliable in Puerto Rico. So I have now, you know, internet being beamed to me from the sky, which I think is huge, because now you can be truly off grid. You can have off grid electricity, you can have your food, and you can have internet, and you can plug into the world as an off-grid individual. I see these things as very liberating to individuals. You know, where you can actually thrive and have no connection to the grid. You don't actually need the roads. You don't actually need a lot of these structures. And that's actually sort of this argument about technology is that it will lead to this breakdown of larger jurisdictions, because in the industrial age, while you needed these giant nation states to guard global trade and guard the industrial production, that's not where the wealth is anymore. It's in individuals, it's in technology. And so that naturally leads to a breakdown of jurisdictions, where if one hacker can defend a city instead of, an entire army, the optimum size of government becomes much smaller.
That's a good point. I think when I usually think about technology, I usually think about it as like a centralizing agent, that it centralizes power. And I don't often appreciate the decentralization aspect. I think that's a good question. Like, in the aggregate, does technology have, obviously it does both in different contexts, but like on the whole, does it have a greater centralizing effect on power, or does it at least potentially do more to decentralize power? That's the ultimate question. It seems like basically what you're getting at is that it does have, like, it does offer the opportunity to become more independent.
It certainly does, if you use it properly. Because you can, let me give you an example. You could go out and buy a Ring doorbell from Amazon, and you could buy all these Google Nest products, and that's centralized. Now somebody else has a video feed into your house. Or you could go buy some Raspberry Pi devices, these little tiny computers, and you can program them with open source software that's available, and have your own surveillance network and have your own smart home, completely off grid, completely that you've designed. And that gives you the power. So this is why it kind of bothers me when people are like, do the helpless victim thing. I'm like, no, you're probably just a little lazy. You can have everything that you want, but you just don't, the easiest way to do it is to give your power and your money to these giant corporations.
And if we want to get conspiratorial about it, I guess the World Economic Forum would have an interest in people not thinking of technology in that way. They like people afraid and submissive and victimized.
So if you
look, for example, if you look in the corporate media, you're not probably going to see this Raspberry device that you could use to create your own home surveillance system. That's not going to get a lot of play. That's the thing that I think people should always keep in mind when they're consuming any media, is what are the underlying interests of the entity that is the purveyor of this media. Because there's always an agenda. The agenda could be like benevolent and altruistic and helpful and empowering. But when we're talking about the corporate media, that's not true ever.
Right. They obviously have other interests, which we talk about on a regular basis on the Daily Bell. And it's a lot of this stuff where you're like, some people wonder, you got to explain, like, well, why would that person want the power? Like, why would they be doing evil things? And you're like, just like, look at history. The power is the object. Like you said in your recent article, power is the end goal. So you don't have to wonder, like, what is Bill Gates going to do with more money or more power? Really? It's like, power is the goal. They want that power. And like you said, they're not going to advertise these products that free you. they're not going to advertise, how to completely cut yourself off from the corporate state, but it is possible. It really is possible these days, because I think of technology, and it helps that more people are kind of waking up to this sort of thing and realizing that they need solutions. And I think it's important to remember that we're in the middle of an information war. Things like might seem confusing, and you have the, MAGA versus the leftists, but you also have a lot of people waking up and just going, this isn't working. Are there other solutions? It's important, I think, also to remember that the bad times don't last forever, that a lot of times there'll be a low, a worst part of it. And yes, are they trying, are they trying to usher us into a Chinese style social control system? That their plan for that is to last forever, so it's not like we can just assume that the best times are going to come back, or that the worst times will be short-lived. But if you look at history, the worst times were always, if not short-lived, they did have an ending. So one way that I think about this whole collapse thing is it a matter of waiting it out? Is it a matter of treating this like a siege, where the WEF, whoever you want to say, is holding us in siege right now, where we have to survive until they lose interest or until they collapse? Because remember, a lot of their institutions are collapsing as well. It's not like they have unlimited resources to throw at this global agenda. Just to throw some examples around, it's like CNN's new, streaming platform didn't last. That didn't work. They wasted $300 million on it or something like that to try to propagandize to people, to try to use technology to centralize their control, and it didn't work. So one mentality is to wait out this siege of our individual rights and make sure you have the power to wait that out. And I would call that like a robust plan. I plan to be more anti-fragile about it. And the idea behind anti-fragile, a lot of people are aware of the book, is that you don't just survive. It's things that gain from disorder. So in this scenario where there's a global crew trying to collapse the supply chains that we depend on and trying to collapse our way of life and change what has really worked really well for the West, use that against them, use it for your own personal gain, which the only way I know how to gain personally, because I'm not willing to be corrupt and, steal from people. The only way I know how to gain personally is by helping people, is by providing goods and services to other people that are valuable in a exchange, a voluntary exchange between consenting adults. Basically, that's how I know how to make money and improve the world. And so that's sort of my plan, is to treat this as an opportunity to become anti-fragile, operate in this increased environment, this environment of increased confusion, and this environment of a really scary environment where a lot of people are going to need a lot of help. And if I can help them, that will increase my own standing in society.
If there is going to be like a decent future, it's got to be decentralized. In my view, we have to go back to like much smaller economies and societies. I don't foresee the US population has been growing so rapidly. I don't know what the population was like in American Revolution times.
It was around 6 million, I believe.
50. It's like 50 times, right? Because it's like 300 million plus now.
Yeah.
And it's just been growing and growing and growing. Is like functional society and economy, is it scalable like that? Like in terms of like the number of people in it? I don't know. But I do know that humans evolved for over hundreds of thousands of years, working in relatively small groups. Like Dunbar's number is like either 150 or 250 off the top of my head. That's like the maximum number of people that you're like psychologically capable of caring about. Like you might be able to remember names of people outside of that and faces, but you have no real like emotional investment in them. It's like if I hear about somebody in Washington State, which I've never been to, that got in a tragic car accident, like I'm not like happy about it, but like if I'm being honest, I don't really care. Like
yeah.
Well,
that's a good point with like media, that everything's global. Any tragedy you hear about everywhere, and you start going, well, the world is just filled with tragedies. And then you go, well, I actually don't know anybody that has died. Like, I don't think I know anybody that's been murdered. You know what I mean? Like, I agree. Maybe that's my privilege, but the point being is that it's not that you don't care about these other people. It's that you don't know them and it's not part of your life. And maybe you shouldn't care so much about what other people are doing. You know, when you reverse this and you talk about like, well, no, everybody in the United States has to use proper pronouns. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, no, we have this has nothing to do with my life. I don't need to like worry about people's pronouns. They went and pulled, you know, these social justice warriors want to call Latinos and Latinas Latinx or Latinx. I don't even know how you're supposed to like pronounce it. Yeah. And they went and pulled a bunch of Latinos. 3% of them had even like heard of it or like preferred that. They're like, what the hell are you talking about? So, and this is another type of imperialism, or you could call it like the trying to spread a religion where these people think they know better than other people. And so they go, I'm going to spread the right way to live to everybody else. And I'm going to intervene in their lives by force, if necessary, to make their lives better by adding, pronouns or something. The point being is that this goes both ways. So when we say that we don't care about what happens in some random place when somebody dies that we don't know, it goes both ways. I'm also not trying to impose my will on a bunch of people I don't know and be like, you have to live this way. So a great example, like I want to start my own little society. I want a community of like-minded people, and we're going to grow our own food and we're going to build together. We're going to incubate parallel economy businesses. And I don't need everybody to participate in that. I don't need everybody to care about something like that. All I need is my group of maybe 150 people to be left alone, And I think to have multiple groups like that is really a way to build a nice anti-fragile bottom-up economy of grassroots where, yeah, you have a tragedy that happens somewhere and it doesn't affect everybody. One solar flare, EMP, whatever, it doesn't shut down the entire electric grid of the entire United States.
I do like this idea, and I am very sympathetic to it. I've struggled with this issue in the context of libertarianism for a long time, because like by nature, I am a libertarian. By like temperament, I mean, like in terms of like my attitude and how I look at the world, it's basically what you just said. Like I don't want to impose on other people, and I definitely don't want them to impose on how I live. The main problem is the problem of externality. Like for instance, Alex Jones gets a lot of. I don't want to turn this into a conversation about Alex Jones, but I'm just using it as an example. He gets a lot of shit for talking about the turning the frogs gay, the water turning the frogs gay. But that's a legitimate problem. The water supply is in the US is totally contaminated with this chemical called atrazine that turns frogs into hermaphrodites and in all likelihood has similar physiological effects on humans. So like, what do you do about that? What do you do about these externalities where what people do outside of your group actually can potentially have an effect on, like a really potentially devastating effect on your own life?
No, so personally, in this, I know this is just an example, but I would, in my own community, make sure that we weren't being affected by externalities. And I would try to choose a place that wasn't going to be extremely affected by externalities. And of course, personally, I would try not to hurt other people, but I know you can't just depend on everybody doing that. I think in a real justice system, people would be held accountable for physical, measurable harm that they do to others. Pfizer, maybe. No, we can't talk about that. But the companies or whoever that does harm, if you can trace that back, of course, they should be held accountable for that harm. So I guess the real question is, like, in the type of society where you have this grassroots libertarianism that I'm talking about and that you said that you're naturally sympathetic towards, would that increase or decrease these externalities, which of course are already occurring? I mean, the biggest polluter on earth is like US military, and you have all these people with all sorts of health problems from things that they've done. So that's the real question, I guess. Do you think there's going to be more of this sort of stuff or less of it? Do you think it's harder to hold people accountable or easier?
Okay. Well, on the one hand, if everything's localized, the individuals in this community have much more control over what occurs in their area that they're responsible for. Whereas all of these bad actors like the US military and these giant pharmaceutical, there's a lot of pharmaceutical runoff in the water supply too. All these giant pharmaceutical companies, they're so removed from like your immediate jurisdiction of control, like as an individual or as a small group, that if the control over such things were more localized, then that would definitely be a check on that kind of behavior. On the other hand, though, if you have a lack of any central authority, how could you meaningfully, like you said, they should be held accountable, and they should, but how could you go after them to like actually enact that punishment if there is no centralized authority?
Yeah. And that is, part of this decentralization, what I'm talking about, if technology does in fact lead to smaller jurisdictions and larger governments balkanizing, that's one of those problems that there probably will be more war between jurisdictions. Now, when you look at the numbers of people that were killed in gigantic nation state wars from Napoleon up through the 20th century, that's still a larger death toll. Like 3 big wars can kill however tens of millions of people. Whereas even if there's 1,000 little wars, the death toll might still be smaller, for instance. So if we're going into this area, this time frame that is more like the Middle Ages in some ways, a technologically advanced Middle Ages, where you have to basically build your castle to be safe, and you can't, it's really hard to infiltrate other people's castles. So that might be Pfizer's or pharmaceutical companies. It's going to be harder to hold them accountable. So yeah, I mean, it's just the reality of where I believe the world is going. There's going to be some benefits, where one of them being is that you can have your castle and you'll probably be pretty safe in it. You can have your little society that is honestly going to be, people think, oh, the army will roll in. I don't personally think that that's going to happen for a lot of these types of little societies that start springing up, because there's nothing to gain and there's everything to lose for that invading army. It's going to be a lot easier to protect small bands of people like this, just from the fact that there's going to be so many of them, little city states everywhere. Like you said, there's a flip side to that, and it's going to be harder to hold certain bad people accountable.
I'm not trying to rain on the parade, because I do think it's the right thing to do to localize and disperse power across a wider plane.
But I think your point is important, is that people need to prepare for this world. And the way I think that they should do that is by building that castle, to use the same analogy. Get your group together, find a like-minded group, build the wall. I mean, grow your food, get your energy figured out, get your supply chains figured out. And personally, if you want to take the approach of anti-fragile, set up some businesses that are going to help people do these things. And those are going to do really well as people build their castles to thrive in this coming technologically advanced dark ages. That's why I started this parallel economy project. That's why I started talking about this community that I want to build and really do intend to build. This is something I'm trying to break ground on within 2 years.
Wait, so where, I don't know if I read this in the stuff you've written, where is there a physical location that you're trying to build this?
The physical location is not chosen yet, but I do. So Florida, I like Florida. Right now, I think Florida is like the best place in the United States.
Oh, definitely. If I move back to the US, it would be to Florida for sure.
Unfortunately, a lot of people agree with me, which means that real estate prices are very high right now. Sort of waiting for the collapse of that with a lot of other millennials, but I don't know if that's going to happen. You can, I don't know. It would need to be at least 20 acres for my liking. You can get 20 acres of land in Central Florida for, a few $100,000 if you look in the right spots. That's a definite possibility. It's interesting though, when you go and look on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, which is one of the safest places in Mexico. It's as safe as Wyoming. There's these old agave plantations that they used to grow agave mostly for the fibers to do rope. And these were abandoned in like the 1930s, I think, during a revolution or, political change. And a lot of stuff changed. Society collapsed for these people, if you will. And so there's all these gigantic abandoned plantations on the Yucatan Peninsula. And so there's ones that already have like boutique hotels with like 12 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, and like hundreds of acres of land that are going for like a couple $1 million. If you want to just buy the raw land without any infrastructure, there's like a few $100,000 for literally in some cases 1,000 acres. So that is also interesting.
The Yucatan is super interesting. That's why I'm going there. Like the culture and the history. So that seems like that should be like near the top of the list.
Yeah. I also live in Puerto Rico right now, and there's you can get some land here, and I think it's a great place to have land. It's not traditional farming, might not be the best here, but there's year-round natural food growing here. So if you set up a food forest with, coconuts and plantains and all sorts of fruit, you got sweet potatoes. And I mean, it's honestly really abundant here. So that's another possibility. And then you would have certain benefits. Digital nomads who are exporting their services could sign up for the Act 20 is what it used to be called. It's basically 4% corporate tax rate. That's what I'm doing down here with my company. And so that's a way for people who work online to take advantage of that. Will that be there forever? Do you want to base an entire community on that? I don't know. So I would say right now, the most likely scenario is Florida. There's a benefit and there's a risk to being in the United States. The United States still has a lot going for it, but it is an empire that is probably collapsing in one way or another.
It's super dangerous, the federal government. I mean, if you just look at the moves, they've got 87,000 new IRS agents that they're hiring. And now, I don't know if you saw those videos, but now they're training them with guns. I mean, that's just one example. The Capitol Police are opening up offices I think in Florida was one of them. The security state budget goes up every year. Then you have this like war on domestic terrorism that they just relentlessly push in the corporate media, which just a domestic terrorist just means anyone who disagrees with the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
It's
the symbols.
I would be skeptical. I would be real skeptical about like permanently settling in anywhere in the US, even though Florida is the best place for sure.
Right. I do hope that someday that state governments are going to start having the balls to assert themselves. And I don't try to like worship Ron DeSantis or anything. I think there's plenty to criticize him over, but I think he's kind of at least got certain things correct in terms of kind of making a state more robust, kind of setting up the future fight over autonomy, and certain governors or state legislatures could put their states in a better position for independence. Because that's another way that this collapse could go, is that the federal government could implode and the states are suddenly more or less independent nations. Now, would I want to live through that? Would I want to try to run a little society like while that's all happening? Probably not. It'd probably be better to hang out on Yucatan Peninsula and then come back if things get better. But anyway, so that's the land thing. There is a lot to consider here still. There's a lot of people that want to, for instance, build tiny homes and farm their own food. And either they don't have the money to start it up or they don't have the expertise to do it. So the idea is to bring in mentors who know how to do these things and then bring in students who want to do them. You all settle in this community and you start building parallel economy businesses, you start building self-sufficiency, and you see how much prosperity you can create in this little
it's
area.
interesting, you know, like I can see someone listening to the pitch and thinking like, that sounds like communism.
Oh my God.
It's interesting, the intersection, you know, of like
Yeah.
ultra libertarianism meets like communism.
It's hilarious because it sounds like these hippie communes, except profitable. I mean, that's what I was actually talking to my parents about this the other day, who, you know, are older. So they remember when these ideas were all on the left, and it was the lefts that were fighting against the powers, the military industrial complex, and the left wanted to form their communes. What the left got wrong is that the communes were not profitable. So basically my whole thing is make it profitable, make it for profit, make money, and you can do this forever. You won't have to abandon your little commune when you realize that nobody wants to do work. You reward people for work, and it all works out. Marrying the best of both worlds is like the hippies of the 60s and 70s with the modern people who understand economics, basically.
It sounds like a really interesting project. So
yeah, I hope we can get it going. Anybody that's listening to this, that's made it that far, you can support this. You can go and, first of all, I have this resource, the 12 parallel economy businesses that you can start today. That's if you want to help the world and make money. I'm like being serious about this. Like, I really think that starting a business should be helpful to other people. That's the whole point of it. You're serving others, and it should be helpful to you. You make money. So start these parallel economy businesses, help make the world more anti-fragile, benefit yourself at the same time. And then when you sign up for that, I'm also going to send you more information about the types, this community that I'm trying to build, and an opportunity to join the locals page, that the Parallel Economy Project locals page. Locals is an alternative to Patreon. It won't kick you off for basic free speech. So that's why I'm using locals. And you can join this community and start building this type of thing if you're interested in this little society that I'm talking about. So I think with that, Ben, is there anything else you want to add before we sign off for today?
Check out my website, armageddonpros.com.
Yeah,
I repost a lot of Daily Bell articles there also.
Absolutely, yeah. And appreciate you coming on to talk to me today, and people can continue keeping up with you, like you said, on your blog and on the Daily Bell. So thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, Joe.